So we're back with another Perils in Paradise card review. Today we got a new Druid Legendary and some neutral cards as well. But let's kick things off here with Cruise Captain Laura. This is a new 7-mana 4/5 pirate with Battlecry. Summon 2 random locations. Also a reminder that Druid cards will be playable in Warrior. If you use the Warrior Tourist, it's going to allow you to travel to Druid, which means this could be played in both Druid decks and Warrior decks. You know, keep in mind, like, Battle Cries and Warrior can be something. But at a base level, just talking about the upsides of this card. So number one, stats aren't exactly exciting for a 7-drop. You're really going to hope to realize the upside potential of this card through its Battle Cry and getting 2 random locations. Boy, it feels really iffy to me. So let's look at the locations currently in standard format just to give ourselves a little bit of an expectation. We have 4 1-cost locations, 3 2-cost locations, 3 3-cost locations, including the new one, Hiking Trail. Remember, this already got revealed. This is going to be a Drew location, again, playable in Warrior. A handful of 4s, 3 4s, and that one big old 7 there with Prison of Yogg-Saron. So on average, most locations are lower cost than higher cost because we have so many in that 1-cost slot, which that already makes me really nervous, because if you look at these locations, like, they are effects that are, like, generally useful. They're not, like, too synergistic necessarily. You can always probably benefit a little bit from restoring 3 health. Transforming your friendly minion actually looks pretty solid on Cruise Captain Laura herself, because she has such bad stat lines. Sanguine Depths is like, probably not that excited to get like an enrage effect. Spell damage could be hit or miss depending on the situation. When you get to the 2s, I mean, it's the same sort of thing. Like Mosh Pit, you will probably get the corpses popping up once that arrives on board. So you would be able to use this, but how valuable is the Reborn going to be? Jungle Gym's actually probably pretty bad. You don't have likely very many beasts. That's a super synergistic one. You may not have Battle Cries for Fairy Tale Forest. Dance Floor is probably okay, but, just depends on how many, like, wide board minions you can support. Stuff like Hiking Trail generally, does something, but probably not something super useful. Crimson Expanse, again, seems really specific and hard to get upside from. Puppet Theater, Prison are probably pretty good. Crystal Cove, I bet you can find some ways to work with. Forge of Wills, same story. But ultimately, looking at this, it's like the locations are at best okay, I would say. I mean, maybe Prison of Yogg-Saron's a home run, but even that's pretty risky sometimes depending on the game state. The great thing about Prison in normal is, like, you kind of choose to push the button when you're behind, which you could still hold off with your Laura to save and push the button when you're behind, but then your Laura hasn't really done much, right? Like, you're just sad that your Laura summoned a location you're scared to use. But then, okay at best, and then not that great at worst. And a lot of them are not that great. Like, results that just, although they may not be actively harmful or useless, they just don't really do that much. Like, Fan Club's just not going to do that much. You're not happy to have spent 7 mana to get a Fan Club. If you get like a Fan Club and a Sanguine Depths, you're just like, oh God, what have I spent 7 on? This is miserable. So, I think you have to get 2 higher cost locations to even feel like it's remotely worth it. And even then, the synergies may not play all that well into your game plan. Now, it is of course worth noting that we're going to see more of these destination cards in this expansion. So the Hiking Trail was our first destination. These are the ones that you can reopen immediately if you do like a trigger or whatever. And that's a nice possibility. Like, if those come in and there's a bunch of high cost locations that have generally useful effects that aren't like too synergy focused or whatever, that could definitely improve the average quality of Cruise Captain Laura. But I'm still not convinced that the downsides won't pop up so often that you just don't get a lot of stuff. Like, you might get 3 or 4 mana worth of locations on average out of your Cruise Captain Laura, which I just don't think is enough when you're spending 7 mana on the card, even with a 4/5 body attached. I think you just need more consistent upside. If this said, like, discover a location and summon it, twice or whatever, and you got 2 locations of your choice, that's the sort of thing where you'd be able to pick ones that fit certain situations. The higher value, higher cost ones, maybe that would be even too good, I don't know, but you could balance around that direction so that you weren't just beholden to the RNG of this, which I think the RNG has a lot of potential downside. So For now, this card looks pretty darn underwhelming to me. I think the average results are just going to be too weak to make it worth it when there are so many other just strong 7 cost plays. Like, I know a lot of times we look at these things and we consider them in a vacuum and we go, oh yeah, okay, I get a couple cool things, but that's not how we rate cards, right? We rate cards compared to their peers. This has to knock something else out of the deck list. And there's a lot of good late game options that are competing against this, and I think I'd choose most of them in both Druid and in Warrior. Frankly, in Warrior with Bran, summoning 4 locations could be a risk from a board space standpoint. That's not necessarily a good thing if you have double battle cries with this one, so I don't even know if that's necessarily a great idea. So for me, I you know, pretty low on this card. You know, that said, if we get 5 locations printed this expansion and they're all like 6 or 7 mana or something completely insane, that would definitely nudge the score on this one up more into the mediocre range as opposed to what I think right now is kind of in a bad range. So moving on to the Bumbling Bellhop. This is a 3 mana 3/3 undead and pirate with taunt and battle cry. If you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, summon a copy of this. So this is potentially 2 3/3 bodies if you're holding that big spell. So because these have taunt, that seems like a reasonable option for a defensively minded deck that just needs to get some speed bumps in the road early and they're already running big spells. I doubt aggressive decks are going to be able to use this successfully to just summon, some annoying bodies on board because they're unlikely to have that spell that costs 5 or more, at least reliably anyway. Even something like, a hand buff Death Knight, where this would really synergize nicely because it's a copy of this, so any stats you put on the front half are also going to show up on the back half. They might have a hard time activating that 5 cost spell as well. There are definitely some big spell options available in Death Knight, but do they line up well in a hand buff deck? Like, do you want to do like a rainbow hand buff with Climactic Necrotic Explosion as your higher cost spell? Possibly, but it's just a lot to weave together to make that work consistently. And it's interesting when you look at 5 cost or higher spells in Hearthstone, there are surprisingly few that get played. I was looking at this because I was curious. If we go through the most popular spells in the game right now on HS Replay, this is the most sorted by most popular. 5 or higher, you've got Sanitize, then you scroll for a long time to Symphony of Sins, then you scroll for a long time to Harmonic Pop, and you scroll for a really long time, I hope I'm not missing one, to Manufacturing Error, which you definitely don't want to run with this card because that's a no minion spell card. So you scroll even further down to Climatic Necrotic, like we talked about. In other words, there just aren't a lot of high cost spells being run. It looks like to me the 2 decks that have the most are basically control warrior and priest decks, probably Highlander decks in most cases, with like light bombs, trial by fires. We saw the Sanitize and the Harmonic Pop as well. So maybe this exists as a little bonus early body for priest and warrior. There's also some battle cry stuff happening here with warrior as well, but I don't know if that's going to be worth it. I think they probably just want to be drawing cards and finding win conditions and stuff early, and I don't know if this has enough upside over other options to be worth it. So, I mean, this is a little more interesting than most neutral cards because it does have some real legitimate upsides with hand buffs, and it does have that defensive utility, and it has a pirate and undead tag too, which, there's corpse stuff happening here. There's wide body pirate synergies that might pop up in this expansion. So I'm absolutely not writing this one off. I think this is much better than average for a neutral card, but just still not one I expect to see a ton of play just because that 5 cost card restriction is probably more restrictive than we think based on just how few get played. Moving on to the Customs Enforcer. This is a 3 mana 2/5 pirate, and it reads enemy cards that didn't start in their deck cost 2 more. So a potential here counter to people generating things, which there are a lot of cards that get generated in Hearthstone these days via discover effects and shuffle into deck effects and so on. So in theory, this presents a counter to that. In reality, we've seen so many cards like this get printed and they just don't really ever get played. Sometimes they're relevant when like randomly summoned or generated off an effect, and it's just like, oh man, that was a little disruptive thing that just happened to be well timed. But actually trying to play this in your deck and actually timing it well and actually being disruptive with it, it's just so unlikely to be relevant, because you play this down, they just like clear it or whatever, play a rush minion, play a removal spell, it's gone, and then they just proceed with their game plan, and you really didn't slow them down all that much at all. And the idea of like timing it perfectly to counter something, it's just so rare and so unlikely to be good that it's not worth the opportunity cost of running this in your deck. You're just better off doing other sorts of things. These kinds of cards do that. So a good card to exist, sometimes relevant card to exist, just one that I think has basically no chance to get played in actual constructed Hearthstone decks, which is totally fine for this. That's okay that it exists, just not going to be a good rating for this one. So next up here is the Carryon Grub, which is probably a fantastic pun. I guess he eats carrion. That's why he's the Carryon Grub. Anyway, he's a 4-mana 5/4 beast. With Battlecry, get a 1-cost suitcase, and you can see there the suitcase on the right. It's a spell. Pack the top 2 cards of your deck into it. So of course, this base version just reads get another card and another card, but when you play that in a game, it'll say like get Frostbolt and Fireball if those are the indeed top 2 cards of your deck. So Carryon Grub, this is a really intriguing design. If you look at it, you know, kind of broadly, it's basically a 5-mana 5/4 that says draw 2 cards. Because, you know, you spend 4 and you spend 1, that's a 5 total expense. You're getting 2 cards drawn. Bada boom. That's actually okay-ish. You know, a lot of the 5-cost draw stuff we've seen is kind of in the draw 3 range these days, but that's an interesting idea. But this does allow you to like create some additional synergies. And in fact, this is yet another card popping up, which synergizes really directly with Sunsap or Lanessa, your spells that cost 2 or less cast twice, because now you're creating a spell that says, you know, get another Frostbolt and Fireball. Oh, I guess not in Paladin. And you know, you're gonna then cast that. Lanessa's gonna cast it twice. You get 2 Frostbolts, 2 Fireballs. We should say Equality Consecration for the sake of Paladin, but you get the idea, right? You're basically doubling the upside of this spell. And I'm wondering, since we're seeing these pop up in like neutral, and this just keeps coming up at review after review, I'm wondering if there are gonna be additional cards of some sort in this expansion that really synergize with this kind of low cost spell idea. It feels like they're leaning into this pretty hard for only a singular card. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. So, you know, that's like doubling spell. There's also stuff like Rewind and Mage. We're having, you know, a spell like this in the pool could be pretty interesting, I guess. I think it should work since the cards are going to be written on the card text. And then, you know, there are other kind of weird situational upsides to this as well, since, you know, it is going to be the top 2 cards of your deck. Anytime there's some kind of effect that adds cards specifically to the top 2 cards of your deck, it could allow you to kind of target those or again create extra copies. There's some weirdness there. There are actually even some effects that add bad cards to the top of your deck from your opponent. There's like, you know, add a random spell to the top of your deck. You can actually use the Carryon Grub to like skip that and tuck it away in the suitcase, and then your next draw would be whatever's after that. So that's incredibly unlikely to be relevant. But a neat idea that you can kind of skip the top cards if they're bad for whatever reason, or you're sure there's a bomb on the top of your deck and you just have to skip it, sort of thing. You can kind of tuck it away into the suitcase. I mean, realistically, that also just kind of gives you the choice to see what's there. It's like, okay, you know, I may not want to spend this mana to draw those 2 cards. They may not be the cards I need. I'm going to play the Grub on 4, and then I have the kind of luxury of choice to, you know, spend that mana now and get those things, or just kind of bake it away for later. And when I need those, you know, whatever moment, I'm just kind of saving that mana for banking it for later, basically, and not wasting that 1 mana as compared to like a 5-mana 5/4 that drew you 2 cards. This gives you a little bit of extra mana flexibility on top of some extra synergies. So I don't know, this is like really creative and really cool. And you know, we talked about some super specific niche use cases for this. I don't know that gets it into relevance, though. You know, I think the sneakiness factor here might just be a little bit too high, and finding the moments and finding the opportunities just seems pretty difficult. So outside of that really specific low-cost card synergies, which we will keep an eye on for this one, I don't think it gets there as sort of a more general use case card. So limited impact here, not terrible by any means. Again, pretty solid for a neutral, but just hard to use this in really compelling ways. So that said, let's do some quick reviews. Cruise Captain Laura is a 2-star card for now. Bumbling Bellhop is a 3-star card. Customs Enforcer is a 1-star card. Carryon Grub is a 3-star card. And there you go. So not the highest power level set of cards here, but I think some interesting designs to think about. Some neat little things to cook on. These have like potential homes and stuff. I'm curious if you guys like Cruise Captain Laura a little bit more than I do. I think some of you might hate it even more than I do. There's just a lot of wonky locations in the pool, but like I said, if we get some crazy locations revealed in the next couple weeks or whatever, we may revisit this one and talk about it in that context. I think that's just unlikely to happen, though. I think it's going to be a lot of like 1, 2, and 3 cost locations that just don't really pack enough punch. So we'll see, but could be fun anyway. Just getting some random stuff is always enjoyable. So all that said, share your thoughts on these cards down below. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.